Every shot fired tells a tale. Subscribe today and uncover the legends of the Wild West. In the turbulent years of America's Civil War, there were names that echoed across the divided states: generals, presidents, and war heroes. But hidden in the smoke and ashes of Missouri, there emerged another kind of figure. A boy, slight in frame but merciless in heart, whose name became a curse whispered in fear. That boy was Archie Clement, remembered not as a soldier, but as the young butcher of Missouri. Before we dive into his bloody legacy, remember, our channel exists to bring you these untold and often forgotten stories of the Wild West. If you love history that feels alive, cinematic, and raw, then hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover the legends, outlaws, and lawmen who shaped America's frontier. Missouri, a land on fire. To understand Archie Clement, you must first understand Missouri in the 1860s. The Civil War was not just fought on distant battlefields like Gettysburg or Antietam. Here, it was neighbor against neighbor, family against family. Missouri was a border state, officially part of the Union, but its people were torn in two. Union supporters clashed with Confederate sympathizers in an endless cycle of raids, ambushes, and reprisals. Homes were burned, crops destroyed, towns pillaged. And in this cauldron of hatred and revenge, young boys grew up faster than they should have, with rifles in their hands before they even knew what manhood meant. Archie Clement was one of those boys. The boy who chose the gun. Archie was born in 1846 in Missouri, into a world already simmering with tension. By the time he was a teenager, war had broken out. For most, 15 years old would be an age of innocence. For Archie, it was an age of blood. He was small, barely 5 feet tall, weighing no more than 100 pounds. With sharp eyes and a wiry frame, he looked more like a boy than a soldier. But appearances deceived. Behind those youthful features was a heart already hardened by conflict. When the war came, Archie didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for official enlistments or uniforms. Instead, he sought out the guerrillas, the men who fought not in open fields, but in shadows, in ambushes, in raids that blurred the line between soldier and outlaw. It was here, among the bushwhackers, that Archie Clement found his calling. Entering the world of guerrilla warfare. Missouri was crawling with guerrilla bands during the war. Some fought under the Confederate banner, others simply for survival, and some for pure vengeance. Among the most feared of these leaders was William T. Bloody Bill Anderson. Anderson's men were notorious for their savagery. They painted their horses with bright colors, carried pistols in both hands, and took no prisoners. When Archie joined them, he was just 15, but he took to their brutal style like he was born for it. Anderson quickly noticed him. Though young, Archie was fearless. Some even said reckless. In ambushes, he rode at the front, pistols blazing, his small size making him almost invisible until it was too late. In camp, he displayed a cold-blooded streak that shocked even hardened guerrillas. Anderson gave him responsibility beyond his years, treating him less like a boy and more like a weapon. A reputation forged early. It didn't take long for Clement to build a reputation. Villagers whispered of the child soldier who showed no mercy. Unionists cursed his name as a devil in boys' clothing. His acts were not just of war, but of terror. He didn't simply fight soldiers, he struck fear into civilians, burning homes, intimidating towns, making sure the Union-loyal Missourians lived in constant dread. One survivor would later describe Clement as having the face of a boy and the heart of a wolf. By the age of 16, Clement was already known across Missouri, and his story was only beginning. The path to bloodshed. The Missouri bushwhackers thrived on chaos. They weren't bound by conventional rules of warfare. They robbed, they looted, and they executed prisoners without hesitation. For Archie, this wasn't just about politics. He wasn't fighting for the South, not really. He was fighting because violence had become his identity. The Civil War gave him a reason to unleash it. In the chaos of Missouri, Clement found a kind of twisted freedom. No laws, no boundaries, only survival, power, and fear. And Archie, though still a boy, embraced it fully. Foreshadowing the Butcher. Though Part 1 of his story only scratches the surface, the seeds of Clement's bloody legacy were already sown. From the moment he picked up a pistol, he chose a path that would make him infamous. He wasn't just another guerrilla fighter. He was something darker. A boy who turned war into an excuse for cruelty. A child who became a symbol of terror. By the time Archie Clement was 17, he had already done enough to haunt Missouri for generations. And soon the war would give him an opportunity to carve his name into history forever. But that is a story for Part 2. This has been the beginning of The Young Butcher of Missouri. Archie Clement S. Bloody Legacy. Stay with us because what comes next will shock you even more. The transformation of a teenage guerrilla into one of the most feared outlaws Missouri had ever seen. When people speak of Archie Clement, they rarely mention his childhood. They talk about Centralia. September 27, 1864. The town of Centralia, Missouri, was quiet that morning. Farmers tending to chores, families preparing for another day of war-torn uncertainty. But in the distance, a storm was riding in. Not of weather, but of men. Guerrillas. And at their head, flying like a demon through smoke and dust, was Archie Clement, just 18 years old. Riding with Bloody Bill. By 1864, Clement had become one of Bloody Bill Anderson's most trusted lieutenants. Anderson's gang of guerrillas was notorious for speed, violence, and cruelty, and Archie matched them stride for stride. He rode a small, wiry horse, his frame still boyish, his pistols always ready. But his size only made him more terrifying. Witnesses recalled seeing him grin like a child while committing acts that turned grown men's stomachs. That day in Centralia would seal his reputation. The ambushed Union troops were moving through the area, unaware of what awaited them. Clement and Anderson's men struck with fury. They derailed a train, dragging Union soldiers from the wreckage. The guerrillas gave no quarter. It wasn't war in the conventional sense. It was slaughter. Dozens of unarmed Union soldiers were executed on the spot. Survivors begged for mercy, but none was given. And in the chaos, Archie Clement stood out. The Butcher emerges. Eyewitnesses claimed Clement went further than even Anderson's hardened guerrillas. He scalped the dead, mutilated their bodies, leaving behind a spectacle of terror meant to send a message. Some said he whistled while he worked, as if what he was doing was no different than a farm chore. It was here that Clement earned the nickname whispered with dread, the Butcher. Centralia became a word burned into Missouri's memory, a massacre that sent shockwaves across the Union. And while Bloody Bill Anderson was feared as the leader, it was Clement, the boy lieutenant, who horrified even fellow guerrillas. A taste for terror. For Archie, Centralia wasn't just a battle, it was transformation. He had killed before, yes, but now he reveled in it. The Civil War, already brutal, had produced monsters on both sides, but Clement embraced brutality as identity. Union papers wrote about him as if he were a ghost, a devil child haunting Missouri's backroads. Confederate sympathizers both admired and feared him. To some, he was a patriot striking at invaders. To others, he was a criminal beyond redemption. A reputation in blood. After Centralia, Archie Clement was no longer just a boy guerrilla. He was legend and nightmare. Townsfolk who heard he was near would flee or hide. Union patrols doubled their numbers when rumors spread of his presence. Even among Anderson's gang, Clement stood apart. He wasn't just fearless, he was cold. Men, hardened by war, whispered that Archie seemed to enjoy cruelty more than anyone else, as if bloodshed filled a void inside him. The cost of violence. But every act of brutality carried consequences. The Union Army was no longer willing to tolerate guerrilla raids. They began hunting the bushwhackers relentlessly. Rewards were offered. Scouts sent out. And as Clement's infamy grew, so too did the determination to destroy him. Still, for a time, he thrived in the shadows. Missouri's hills and forests gave him cover. The chaos of war gave him purpose. And his legend, of the boy butcher who spared no one, spread far beyond the state. The war within yet war is never permanent. By late 1864, the Confederacy was weakening. Union forces were pressing hard, reclaiming territory, crushing resistance. For Clement and his fellow guerrillas, survival meant adapting. Some turned to banditry. Some tried to disappear. But Archie Clement. He had tasted fear, tasted power. For him, there was no turning back. Centralia had made him famous, but it had also locked him onto a path he could never escape. He was no longer just a fighter in a war. He was a criminal forged in the fire of bloodshed. Foreshadowing the future. When the Civil War finally ended, most young men returned home, scarred but eager to rebuild. Clement was different. Peace held no appeal. He had been baptized in blood at Centralia, and he carried that baptism forward. If war ended, then he would simply invent his own battles. If there was no army to fight, he would turn his guns on banks, towns, and anyone who stood in his way. The boy butcher was not done. He was only getting started. In Part 3, we'll follow Archie Clement into the uncertain years after the Civil War. With peace declared, he chose not to lay down his weapons. Instead, he lit the fuse of America's outlaw era, inspiring men like Jesse James and changing Missouri's history forever. When the guns of the Civil War finally fell silent in 1865, the nation exhaled with exhaustion. Cities burned, families torn apart, and soldiers, Union and Confederate alike, dragged themselves home to rebuild broken lives. But not Archie Clement. For him, war was never a uniform, a flag, or even a cause. War was blood, fear, and power. And though the Confederacy was gone, Clement refused to surrender. He simply carried the battlefield into peacetime. Missouri, a land still bleeding Missouri in 1865, was a land haunted by violence. The state had been a borderland, torn apart by neighbor fighting neighbor, raid against raid. Even after Appomattox, bitterness lingered. Union soldiers patrolled the countryside. Former Confederates nursed wounds and grudges. And out of that chaos, Clement saw opportunity. His skills as a guerrilla, ambush, speed, disguise, translated seamlessly into outlawry. He didn't need an army. He only needed his pistols, his horse, and his reputation. The bank at Liberty. In February 1866, Clement and a handful of former guerrillas struck boldly at the heart of Missouri society. Broad daylight. The Clay County Savings Association in Liberty. They stormed in with pistols drawn, shouting orders, terrorizing clerks and townsfolk. By the time it was over, more than $58,000 was gone. An unimaginable sum at the time. It was the first successful daylight bank robbery in U.S. history. Witnesses said Clement orchestrated the whole affair with chilling precision. He barked orders like a commander on the battlefield, his small frame belying the authority in his voice. For Clement, the war hadn't ended. He had simply changed the target. A message in blood. But Clement wasn't satisfied with the money. On the streets outside, a local college student was shot and killed. Whether by accident or design, no one knew. But the result was clear. Clement had sent Missouri a message. No bank, no town, no family was safe. This was not just banditry. It was psychological warfare, the same tactics Clement had perfected during the war. Fear was as valuable to him as gold. Jesse James learns the trade. Among Clement's companions at Liberty were young ex-guerrillas Jesse and Frank James. Jesse, still raw from wartime wounds, watched closely as Clement moved with ruthless confidence. Later in life, Jesse James would become the face of American outlawry. But in those early years, his education came at the side of Archie Clement. Where Jesse polished his image with talk of lost causes and Southern honor, Clement cared for none of it. He was pure violence, unvarnished. In many ways, Jesse became the public face of what Clement had already pioneered. Defiance against authority. The Union-backed government of Missouri couldn't ignore Clement's brazen crimes. Lawmen hunted him. Rewards were posted. Yet Clement strutted through towns as if untouchable. Witnesses recalled him boasting in saloons, daring officials to come for him. Sometimes he disguised himself, slipping into enemy territory like he had in the war. Other times he made no attempt at concealment. It wasn't arrogance alone, it was strategy. By making himself a ghost one day and a spectacle the next, Clement kept lawmen off balance. A state terrorized. For ordinary Missourians, Clement's presence was suffocating. Farmers feared leaving home after dark. Merchants whispered about rumors of his next strike. Even veterans, men who had survived Shiloh and Vicksburg, admitted Clement frightened them. He was only in his late teens and barely 20, but he carried himself with the aura of a seasoned killer. Newspapers called him a fiend. Some locals whispered of curses, claiming the boy had been marked by the devil since Centralia. Whether myth or truth, the effect was the same. Clement owned the night. The government strikes back. Governor Thomas Fletcher of Missouri had seen enough. He called upon Major Bacon Montgomery to rid the state of Clement. Montgomery, a hardened Union officer, understood the task wouldn't be easy. Killing Clement would be like trying to cage lightning. But by late 1866, the hunt had begun. Clement's days of unchecked terror were narrowing. Still, the boy butcher wasn't ready to bow. He thrived on defiance, on standing taller as enemies closed in. The same reckless courage that made him infamous at Centralia would now carry him into a final showdown. A war without end. For Archie Clement, the Civil War never ended. Where others saw peace, he saw opportunity for violence. Where others laid down arms, he kept his pistols ready. To Clement, America was still a battlefield, one where he alone made the rules. And as 1866 bled into 1867, Missouri braced itself. The state knew Clement wouldn't go quietly. His war was far from over. In Part 4, we'll witness the final act of Archie Clement's violent saga, his deadly showdown in Lexington, Missouri, where over 30 bullets tore into his body before the boy butcher finally fell, defiant to his last breath. By the winter of 1866, Missouri had grown tired of blood. The war was over, the Union preserved, yet the state remained hostage to the terror of one man barely old enough to shave, Archie Clement. He had outlasted armies, defied lawmen, and laughed in the face of governors. But Clement's war was about to end. Not on his terms, but in a hail of bullets. The manhunt begins. Governor Thomas Fletcher had declared that Clement must be stopped at any cost. Major Bacon Montgomery, a seasoned Union officer, was tasked with the job. Montgomery understood the danger. Clement was no ordinary outlaw. He was a guerrilla forged in the fires of Civil War, a killer who thrived on chaos. Montgomery gathered his men and tracked every whisper, every rumor. Townsfolk swore they had seen Clement riding openly, taunting pursuers. Others claimed he disguised himself, slipping through checkpoints with ease. But in late December, the trail led to Lexington, Missouri, a quiet river town soon to be written in blood. Clement returns. On December 13, 1866, Clement rode into Lexington with a handful of loyal followers. Some said he came to collect money from sympathizers. Others believed he wanted to flaunt his defiance in the governor's face. Whatever his reason, he made no effort to hide. He drank in saloons, walked the streets, daring the law to confront him. It was classic Clement, reckless, theatrical, designed to terrify. Word reached Major Montgomery. The trap was set. The streets erupt. Before dawn on December 14th, Montgomery's men moved into position. Lexington awoke to the sound of boots, shouted orders, and the unmistakable echo of gunfire. Clement, startled but unshaken, drew his revolvers and burst into the street. Witnesses later swore the young outlaw seemed possessed, his small frame moving with lightning speed, his pistols spitting fire in both directions. The fight raged across the town square. Clement ducked into alleys, returned fire from doorways, and even leapt over fences to escape encirclement. But Montgomery's men kept pressing. 30 bullets, one bullet slammed into Clement's shoulder, spinning him around. Another tore through his leg, dropping him to one knee. Still he fought, teeth clenched, spitting curses, firing until his pistols clicked empty. The soldiers closed in, their rifles thundering. By the time it ended, Clement's body was riddled with more than 30 bullets. And yet, even as he collapsed, witnesses swore his last act was to raise his revolver one final time, as if daring death itself. At just 20 years old, Archie Clement, the young butcher of Missouri, was dead. Shock and silence. For a moment, Lexington fell silent. The boy who had haunted Missouri's nightmares lay lifeless in the dirt, his pale face smeared with blood, his small body shattered but strangely defiant in death. Some townsfolk cheered. Others whispered in awe, unable to believe the devil's child was truly gone. A legacy of blood Clement's death should have ended the terror, but in truth it planted a seed. Among his companions, men like Jesse James, the lesson was clear. Boldness, spectacle, and violence could make an outlaw immortal. Within months, Jesse James would step into Clement's shadow, perfecting the mix of banditry and legend. The bank robberies, the gunfights, the myth of the Southern Robin Hood, all of it owed something to Archie Clement. He had shown that terror was not just a weapon, but a performance. The boy who refused to surrender. In the end, Archie Clement never surrendered. Not to the Union, not to the law, not even to 30 bullets tearing his body apart. To his enemies, he was a monster, proof of the war's lingering poison. To his followers, he was a martyr, a boy who fought until the last breath. But to history, Clement remains something more unsettling, a reminder of what happens when war refuses to end, when violence becomes a man's only language, and when a boy learns too young that fear can be power. Epilogue. December 14th, 1866. A winter morning in Lexington. A town square echoing with gunfire. A young man lying dead in the dust, his pistols still warm. Archie Clement's life lasted less than 21 years, but his shadow stretched across decades of outlaw history. He was gone, but the blood trail he left behind was only just beginning. Next time, we'll explore how Clement S. methods shaped the rise of the James Younger gang, and how the legacy of a boy butcher outlived him in the myths of the Wild West. When the dust settled over Lexington and the echoes of gunfire faded into winter silence, Archie Clement was gone. Barely 20 years old, his small, bullet-riddled body was lowered into a shallow grave. For most, that should have been the end. But Clement was no ordinary outlaw. His death marked not the close of a bloody chapter, but the beginning of a legend that would ripple through the American frontier. The aftershock in Missouri news of Clement's death spread like wildfire across Missouri. For many citizens, it was relief. The boy who had haunted their nightmares could no longer strike in the night. Newspapers rejoiced, calling him a demon child, a violent reminder of the war that refused to die. But in the shadows, among ex-Confederates, guerrilla veterans, and bitter men who still nursed hatred of the Union, Clement's fall was seen differently. He was young, defiant, unbroken until the end. To them, he was not a monster. He was a martyr. The blueprint of fear. Clement left behind no manifesto, no philosophy, only his actions. But those actions spoke louder than words. He had shown that crime could be more than desperation. It could be theater. His bank robberies weren't just about money. They were about spectacle, carried out in daylight, meant to humiliate the authorities and prove that the war had never truly ended. His use of disguises, his willingness to spill blood without hesitation, his refusal to surrender even when outnumbered, these became tools adopted by others. Among them was a young ex-guerrilla named Jesse James. The student becomes the master. Jesse James had fought alongside Clement during the war, riding under Bloody Bill Anderson. He had seen Clement's recklessness, his cunning, and his absolute disregard for human life. When Clement was gunned down, Jesse and his brother Frank were watching. They understood the lesson. Terror could be weaponized, violence could be staged, and newspapers could turn bandits into legends. Within a year, the James brothers carried out robberies in the very style Clement had pioneered. They even chose Liberty, Missouri, the site of Clement's infamous daylight heist, as their stage once more. It was no coincidence. It was inheritance. The shadow of a boy. What makes Clement so disturbing is not simply the crimes he committed, but the age at which he committed them. At 15, he was scalping corpses in Centralia. At 19, he was orchestrating robberies. At 20, he was gunned down after wounding and killing trained soldiers. He never knew adulthood. He never built a home, a family, or a future. His legacy was written entirely in gunfire and blood. And yet, because he died so young, he remained frozen in time. The boy who defied armies, the outlaw who never surrendered, the child butcher whose ghost haunted Missouri. Myth versus history. Like many figures of the Wild West, Clement's story became blurred with myth. Some accounts exaggerated his cruelty, others softened it, painting him as a rebel against northern tyranny. But history leaves little room for doubt. Eyewitnesses confirmed his scalping at Centralia. Bank records proved his involvement in daylight robberies. Union reports described his final stand in Lexington, riddled with 30 bullets and still fighting. He was real, his violence was real, and his influence was undeniable. Missouri's bloody legacy, Missouri, more than any other state, carried the scars of the Civil War long after Appomattox. The guerrillas never disappeared. They simply evolved into outlaws. Clement was the bridge. He took the savagery of war and transplanted it into the world of crime. Without him, Jesse James may have remained just another bitter ex-soldier. With him, the blueprint for the American outlaw was drawn. The ghost that never left today. Clement's name is less familiar than Jesse James, Billy the Kid, or Wyatt Earp. But in Missouri, his shadow still lingers. In archives, his crimes are studied as the birth of modern outlawry. In folklore, his spirit is whispered about. A boy who died young but carved his legend into the bones of a state. And in every retelling of Jesse James, in every Hollywood gunfight, in every romanticized outlaw ballad, there's a trace of Clement. The student may have eclipsed the teacher, but the ghost of the young butcher still rides in the background. Closing words. Archie Clement's life was brief, brutal, and unforgettable. He embodied the chaos of a nation torn apart, a child turned killer by war, a young man who chose blood over peace. His death at 20 ended his reign of terror, but it also immortalized him, forever young, forever defiant, forever bloody. The young butcher of Missouri never grew old. He never surrendered, and in the legends of the Wild West, that may be why he still refuses to die. Stay with us, because in the next chapter, we'll follow the trail Clement left behind, straight into the rise of Jesse James, America's most famous outlaw.